So today I want to talk about another issue that's facing Australian financial advisors. And I've been on a bit of a roll bringing up some issues that really face the identity of financial advice in Australia. By the way, these issues aren't just related to financial advice and they're not just related to Australia, but I think it's a key inflection point to think about some of these things. So today I want to talk about the issue of disappearing client books. Now, Australian financial advisors and the financial services sector has been through this Royal Commission thing. And so there's been some legislative change and it's been coming over the last, several years and has culminated through this Royal Commission. And the issue I'm talking about is client books of revenue that are coming from a commission basis that are essentially being switched off and disappearing. Now, even though the legislation hasn't come into force to say that this has to happen today, we're actually seeing product providers go ahead and cut off these commission streams, which are at the moment called grandfathered commissions. And so it's already happening. Now, this is going to be a little bit controversial because on one hand, we've got the people who are in the financial advice space who have been on fee for service. Maybe they've always been on fee for service. Maybe they've made this transition, years ago, who are of the perspective that if you hadn't already, moved from commissions onto a fee for service basis, that, you somehow deserve the scenario that you're in. And to some degree, I think there's a real problem with that. And financial advice in our country is really facing this challenge of trust, and not just trust, but utility. Because let's face it, if we lose the financial advisors that we have at the moment, and to be honest, as someone who's incredibly connected in that community in this country, I get to speak to hundreds, thousands of people throughout the course of the year. So I've got my finger on the pulse to a large degree when it comes to some of these things. And, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people who run advice businesses who are making the decision to get out of advice, whether it's because of the change in education standards, whether it's because of, increasing compliance burdens, increasing costs, whether it's because of the increasing complexities, or really just this feeling of frustration and in a lot of instances actually being attacked. So a lot of the perspective out there at the moment is the Royal Commission came in, it was really the key banks and institutions' fault. The Royal Commission was to investigate that, and the people who are actually paying for that are the ones that were running, I won't say independent because that's in some ways a protected term here, but people who own and operate their financial advice businesses, the ones that have been trying to do things the right way, in however perspective that is, are the ones that are being punished for it. Now, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that is certainly the feeling that is pervasive out there at the moment. Well, there's this one issue that I think is actually far broader spread than maybe most people understand, and that's this issue of disappearing client books. And so what do I mean by that? Well, so many financial planning businesses out there at the moment have got their revenue made up of a combination of fee for service and what is currently grandfathered commissions. Now, a lot of that is because the advice space has been going through this transition already away from purely commission-based to a fee-for-service structure. That's already been taking place. But a large part of it is also because we had a huge number of books of revenue being sold by institutional operations to financial advisors to either expand their business or to start a financial planning business, etc. And they were sold on, in some instances, upwards of 4 times recurring revenue. And the idea being that this is a good way for you to actually create some scale within a financial planning business by buying this book of revenue and then going about contacting these clients that are on a commission service and turning them into real financial planning clients. And that's kind of the idea and the philosophy behind it. And a lot of people who are starting their financial advice journey with a business right at the start were also sold these disappearing client books. And I call them disappearing because that's exactly what's happening at the moment. So the kinds of scenarios that I'm seeing are, you've got someone who's 4 or 5 years in to having bought this, book of business. Maybe they've come from another career or an associated career like accounting or, maybe institutional finance, or maybe being a financial advisor and working with someone else, which is quite common. And they've been sold this book of revenue. And sometimes they might have borrowed, upwards of $1 million. And so they've got more than $1 million worth of debt. They've then gone about trying to contact the clients that are associated with these books. And to be honest, in lots of these cases, that's been pretty difficult because they may have been sold or looked after by a dozen or more advisors in the past. And so the people that have got this name attached to this revenue have been called over and over and over again. So you've got these people in that kind of scenario and, they've been building their financial planning business and maybe they've reached a point now where they've got half and half revenue between them. And all of a sudden, of the $600,000, just in this scenario, $600,000 worth of income that they currently have, $300,000 of that is about to be cut off. And in this particular scenario, they might still have more than $1 million worth of debt attached to this book of business that they've purchased before. So have a think about the causality of that. You've got these advisors who were coming in, they were sold this concept of, take this revenue that was done in a different way before, turn it into real financial planning business. And I've looked in a lot of these businesses and most of them are legitimate. Most of them are legitimately going about turning this, this revenue into what we would consider to be, generally holistic advice. That's good advice, it's compliant, it's looking after clients' interests first. And so think about that scenario. You're 4 or 5 years in and then all of a sudden, not only will you not have the revenue to support the funding repayments of that, but also your business becomes unviable. Now, there's actually a huge number of advisors affected by this. And on the flip side, we have other scenarios where, we may have had an original principal and the business has been around for some time and, they built their business over time on the commission basis of how financial advice was primarily given, in the past. And so that may have transitioned into a business which has primarily fee for service. But then the next generation may have come along and then borrowed money to buy out the previous, founder of the business. And again, similar scenario where a huge amount of debt is now attached to still a pretty significant chunk of revenue that is currently disappearing. And of course, then there's all kinds of combinations of this. I can't tell you how many different scenarios I've seen, hundreds of them. Hundreds of scenarios where the future generation of financial planning, the people who are actually looking and thinking and acting, how can we make this better? How can we build our businesses and turn them into things? And a lot of these cases, the people who are in this situation, in my opinion, were actually a large part of the solution. Because I agree that these inappropriate commission structures of the past are not sustainable going forward. That was something that I considered decades ago when I first started in the financial advice space myself. But I think these people have been the solution, and they were certainly sold that concept as they were part of the solution. Buy these books of revenue, turn them into proper financial planning fees. And for so many of them, that was a major focus over the last 5 to 10 years. And so many advisors are in this position where financially they are facing pretty dire consequences, where a lot of them could end up losing not only their businesses, but their houses, where a lot of them are putting off their staff, they're laying off team members, they're closing offices. And so, as I said, what I'm going to talk about next may sound a little controversial and is probably going to annoy people on one of two sides of the extreme. So on one side, you've got people who feel like they're victimized by this change. And in a lot of cases, perhaps rightly so, perhaps they should feel victimized. But on the other side, you've got, businesses that are, let's say, all fee for service, saying, well, it serves them right. It's great that this is happening, and it's good that they should be shut down, and it's okay if they go bankrupt because it serves themselves right. Now, it's really easy for me in hindsight to say, if I were in their position, would I have borrowed money to buy a book of revenue like this? Well, it's pretty easy for me to say now, well, no, I wouldn't. But that's kind of irrelevant. I think what's relevant is, what do we do about this? And to the people who have that perspective, then what I would say is, if you really believe in the value of financial advice and what you do, then I don't think you can really take the position that shutting down such a big part of the profession, shutting it down in this way could actually be a good thing. I don't think it is. I think if you believe in advice, then allowing advisors who have really, at least conceptually and from their intent, have had the right focus all along, and most of them, I believe, are in that position, to then have them shut down. I don't think that is the future of financial advice. And if we put people into that position, if we lose literally half of the advisors that we currently have, will that increase the trust in Australian financial advice? I don't think it will. Will it increase the utility, the relative utility, where it becomes a conceptual term that you should actually be getting advice? Because that's my opinion. I think everyone needs advice in whatever format it is. Well, I don't think that happens if we just let these businesses fall over. On the flip side, what do we do about it? And I think this is the bit where, on the other hand, the people who are feeling really victimized, that are giving up their mojo, that feel like everything's lost, you might not like what I have to say about this. Because do I think that this is something that may be confronted, in the legal system, unfairly removing an asset or a revenue stream? Yeah, look, there's been a lot of people talking about that. Do I think that's how you, if you're in this position, actually move forward? I don't. I don't think your licensees are going to help you. I don't think they're here to save you. And I certainly don't think that trying to fight what is happening is your best bet. What I actually think should happen is, you've got a choice at the moment. Am I going to stay an advisor? Am I going to take ownership and control of my future? And if that is your choice, then you're really going to need to double down. And the tough message, or the tough love for me to pass on, is almost all of the businesses that I've looked at where, 300,000 out of 600,000 is disappearing, almost all of them, if they change their focus, if they understand how to articulate their value, if they go back to their clients, they change their value proposition and their model and their offer, then they can replace that $300,000 in revenue in most cases before they actually lose it. But that's going to mean transitioning to the kind of business that you probably should have been running before. And I know this might sound harsh, but you have to confront the issue. You have to charge enough. You have to build a robust enough structure. You have to learn how to articulate your value in a way that's truly compelling, that doesn't obfuscate the value of your advice, to talk about fees up front and directly with clients, and to leave your baggage at the door. I've helped businesses that have come in, and one week they're talking about everything's lost, I'm going to lose everything. And within a week or two, just by literally facing the cold hard facts and going and having these conversations and looking at their client books, have replaced $20, $30, $40, $50,000 worth of revenue in a matter of weeks. But it won't be comfortable. I think now is the chance for financial advice in Australia to evolve. And in order for that to take place, if you're one of the people that are in this scenario, you're going to have to take ownership of where you're at. Adversity is part of what breeds strength. Adversity is part of your story, but you can't be a victim to it. You have to take ownership of it. And that's my key message for the financial advice space. There's two of them. One is, everybody deserves a second chance. Whether you believe they should have, converted to fee-for-service revenue before, whether you believe they shouldn't have bought these books of revenue in the first place, is irrelevant. because I believe everybody deserves a second chance. And being an entrepreneur and owning a business of any kind isn't easy. It's tough. And anyone who's run a business, myself included, it's very rare for you to get to a point in your career where you haven't needed that second chance, where you haven't failed in a very drastic way. I know I have. The second thing that I would say is that advice needs advisors. And for the utility of this profession, we need to have enough people with experience who actually understand the value in what they're doing to be around for this to be something that affects our community and society in a positive way, as I believe it should. So what do you think? Where do you think we should be on this? And if you're one of those people who are struggling with this concept, if you're thinking that perhaps maybe you want to double down and actually take control of your business, I would say to you that there's always a solution. Sometimes it's very hard to see for yourself. Sometimes it's almost impossible to put your own emotions into context. That's what advice is. So if you believe in what you do and you're looking to take the next step and take control of your future, then maybe you actually need some external advice as well. Myself, I can put my hand up and say our team here are more than happy to have conversations with people. We're going to be running webinars on value articulation, on pricing, on transitioning books of revenue, on how to prioritize, on how to use technology and video to speed up the process. So we're going to be doing that. There's plenty of coaches out there who are also focused on this, and some really good ones. It doesn't have to be us, but perhaps you need some external input. What are you going to do? How are you going to take ownership and control of your business? And you know what? I think this is actually a key issue for all advisors at the moment. And if the Royal Commission really represented one thing, it's a chance to go, well, hang on a second. Let's take a step back. Who are we? What do we really do? What's really the value we provide? Who are we providing it for? And how much are we charging? And if I were to say anything, it's that almost all businesses have got this bias stuck in their head behind what's done before or how we've answered this question before that doesn't necessarily allow for a freedom of thinking when it comes to those questions. Maybe now's to take a step back and to get some external input for what you're doing. Whether it's with other advisors, whether it's with your peers, whether it's through people like us at the Social Advisor or some of the other awesome coaches and professionals out there, maybe it's time to take a step back and go, well, what are we doing and how are we doing it? And I think right now is that pivot point. Where is the future of advice in our country going? And when it comes to financial advice, I think it's one of the most valuable and critical services that the community absolutely needs. That's why I'm here having these conversations with you. It's why I'm talking about some of these issues. Disappearing client books are going to affect the profession and the community in equal measure. What do you think we should do? Thanks and cheers.